Okay. So, Matt, I think they've all silenced themselves and they've left stuff to us.
I think
Now,
you're on.
ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
quickly out with your checkbooks. Uh, now, good afternoon, good evening. For us, it's good morning. My name is Richard Hill, and I'm here with my incredible colleague, Matt. Introduce yourself.
Yes, well, I'm Matthew Dahlitz. I'm coming from Brisbane today to you guys.
Yes, and I'm in Sydney. You guys are all melting with heat. We're all dissolving with water. So I've Matt and I have packed it up into a small jiffy bag, and we've mailed you some water. So please please take advantage of it when it arrives. But here we are in the brainstorm. It always worries me when we talk about brainstorming, because actually what we've found in the research is that mostly the storm ends up into being rather rough and rambunctious. So brainstorming has its positives and its negatives, but here it's all positive, and we're here to talk about our new book, which is called Matt.
So we're going to talk about the science of psychotherapy, and we've tried to encapsulate what we've been talking about for the last 9 years in a recent book, The Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy, published by Norton. And what we thought we might do today, because we canvass a huge amount of information, and so we can't possibly cover all of that today in this hour. So what we thought we might do is just have a chat about the brains that are in our body, and we'll canvass a little bit of that. And then hopefully that'll stimulate a bunch of questions that we can talk about afterwards. We have a bit of a slideshow that Richard's going
we'll
to
do that.
drive.
So we'll look around the things that are going on in the body. We were thinking, well, we could sort of say some really specific stuff, although we will as we go. But we could also hopefully leave you with oh, wow, I want to look into that. Oh, wow, I want to look into that. So let's make it a bit of a curiosity experience. And now, according to the rules and regulations of the world, there's now a slideshow. Just, oh, look, nods of heads. This is really good. So, as we were saying, the whole concept of it has been building for a long time. And of course, this all goes back to the thousands of years ago when people started talking about the expansion of our understanding. I mean, the atomists back in the Greek days. But we've talked about whole body, holistic, but why? And what is it doing? And how can we come to grips with all this stuff, not still be an expert in the stuff we're interested in? So to be the general practitioner, that practitioner who's able to look broadly. Now, there will always be people who want to specialize, and they're important. But the strange thing is, in our culture, we tend to have the generalist, the general practitioner, as the lesser to the specialist. It's quite the opposite. The general practitioner has got the task of recognizing and then finding some framework in which to determine and attune to their client, where specialists can then come in and be utilized. So we kind of want to turn the thing on its head a bit, but we'll have to wait for a bit of cultural change for that. And there's our website. Please come in and check us out, the science of psychotherapy.com, and you will find a plethora, all kinds of things there, Matt, don't we?
Absolutely. We've got, I always say we've got more content that you can poke a stick at. And
that's right. So if you have a stick, come on down.
So I might just give you a little bit of background where we've come from. So way back, well, almost a decade ago, we started looking at sort of what was going on in the brain. We called ourselves Neuropsychotherapy. And so this was sort of research and information that was coming out of Germany, a couple of decades ago, Klaus Grave was probably the most prominent theorist and practitioner who brought neuropsychotherapy to the forefront in the world of psychotherapy. And we talked a lot about what was happening in the central nervous system. But as we learnt more, and as we discovered how little we really knew, we had to expand beyond what was going on in the cranium. And so we made this shift from the neuropsychotherapist to the science of psychotherapy, because we were discovering that there is just so much going on in the heart, the gut, the immune system, all of these different bodily systems, and of course, in the environment as well, and with genetics. And so we couldn't stay in the head. So we couldn't just stick with neurons. We had to expand.
Yeah. And we had a lot of support and energetic enthusiasm coming from good friends of ours, but particular ones to mention is John Arden, of course, who's written the foreword for the book, but also Lou Cozzolino, who wrote the book, The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, but now he lectures on the science of psychotherapy. And I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to say, hey, Lou, you know that's the title of our book. And he'll go, yeah. but we're adding all these other areas, which we will dabble into today as we give you a sort of an insight and introduction into this book, The Practitioner's Guide, which, as you'll notice, we've got the little section down below. We've got an audio book. Now, I wanted to read it, but I didn't have an American enough accent, I don't know. But the guy, Stephen Bowlby, who read it, did a really fantastic job. And the one thing that was missing was the illustrations, which we have quite a number of illustrations through the book. So, so we've got those added. But here we are. We want to be involved in the, whether we're leaders in the field or in the game, that's up for everybody else to decide. But to be part of the movement that is establishing a new scientifically validated foundation for current psychotherapeutic practice. And we've titled it, and actually the title was a sort of a mutual engagement and chat with John Arden, The 21st Century Psychotherapist. But of course, you know, we mean psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, social worker, anybody involved with mental health, even down to pastoral areas. There's an enormous amount that people can have knowledge about that can help them have a greater attunement to their clients.
Absolutely. And just a note on the word science, you know, we are talking about, as Richard said, the knowledge about, you know, the scientific inquiry that we're all involved in is simply, you know, being curious and, you know, having a look at different areas across disciplines and understanding, you know, some of the mechanisms involved. This, because I find, and we've found, that therapists can often shy away from this word science, you know, because I don't know, somehow that's cold and impersonal, but that's not at all what we're talking about.
No, it kind of did it to itself, didn't it, Matt? You know,
well, yes.
Science became reductionistic and isolated and siloed, and so one field was not allowed to talk about another field, and it's quite extraordinary. It's like everybody's growing wheat, but they say no, but it's a different wheat, you know. But it hasn't. It's all been about the human being.
Yeah. And on that point too, I mean, the 20th century, we saw over 100 different relatively prominent schools of thought in psychotherapy and psychology in general. And, you know, often they were within their own silos. They had their own sort of language. It was often quite esoteric unless you know, really studied that particular school. If you went to a conference that was revolving around a particular school of thought, you had to understand the language and know what they were talking about. What we're trying to do is get back to the basics of what is going on in this, you know, terribly complex system of the human being, and find the commonalities and get us out of these silos.
Yeah, there's a little bit, Matt, I just thought I'd read from this rather excellent book by but in the foreword, John Arden, there's a bunch. It's a great foreword. I mean, the foreword is a real chapter in itself. But he just says it, just let's use his words. When we reduce our focus to one factor of mental health, such as neurons firing, we lose focus on how it interacts with a wide range of other factors. For example, when we focus on one aspect, such as attachment or self-esteem or metabolic energy or genes or neurons or some other important life-sustaining system, we miss the big picture of our overall health. And the science of psychotherapy in the 21st century accounts for how all these systems work together in maintaining mental health. So there's a conceptual difference. There's a conceptual thing going on here that has changed. So what's that conceptual change, Matt?
Well, it's complex.
Segue.
Just before we do segue, I'll segue in a second. But
Okay.
I just wanted to say, don't be intimidated by the volume of information that we and others like ourselves present to you. We are not, we don't expect anybody. We are certainly not the experts in all of these disciplines and all of these areas. But just to highlight once again, it's just being curious and having a knowledge about all of these different elements that are in play. And you certainly can go, and if you have it in mind, it becomes part of you and your intuitive sensibility toward the client. And if you know a little bit about, then you can always go and research some more. But if you're clueless, then you're not going to pick these things up. So don't be intimidated. There's a lot of information out there, but we are hoping that what we can do is just give an umbrella, overarching picture of all of the elements involved, just so that there is some awareness of what to look out for, and we'll drill down to some of those today.
Yeah, and in that context, I mean, there are things that I found more interesting and more engaging in the subjects, and some that Matt. So you'll see us doing it, and I'll say, "Oh, Matt knows about this," or Matt will say, "Oh, that's kind of Richard's bag," and then both of us know that there are other people who are much more have greater detailed expertise in these things, and so we refer to them. So that's the other thing we're saying, is it's all a system of integration, not only of the systems of the body, but the systems of mental capacity and of knowledge. So the blending of minds. But
Yeah,
it's about, the way to do it is that what frustrates us is our learning system is very, very linear. Why we have these silos is because we live in this linear cause and effect. Like this is what causes this, and when you have that, it causes that. So the thing that we're looking at is the outcome, is some kind of result of something that has happened before. Okay, that's one way of thinking. So therefore, my school is going to have a different set of results because what I put in is different. And what the change in the ability for us to have this broader science of psychotherapy attitude, which incorporates the philosophy, which incorporates the felt sense, which incorporates the right and left hemispheric processes of detail, plus also generalization and planning and concept, is this thing, complexity, Matt.
Yeah, and to get into the mindset of thinking in complex, non-linear systems. And like Richard said, that's not just the body parts, and we could argue that there actually are, everything is a continuum within the body, but it's also the complexity of these body systems working, with what is happening in the therapy room. So the dyad, the relationship between the therapist and the client, the relationship between the therapist, the client, and the environment in that moment and in the past. And so this is all part of this complex system, which is, and the key point here is non-linear. Now, there are some pretty direct linear correlations between the cause and effect things that we know about, we're very familiar with, but there is probably the vast majority of interactions that happen within and without the body and between therapist and client are non-linear. I don't know, have I got time for a story, Richard, or we might
Well, let's just move on for a second. Hold on to it,
Okay.
because
Yep.
maybe
All
have
right.
it at the end. Because what we're just doing, and the point we're making, it's a different way of thinking. And
Yeah.
when you actually approach it from this different way, you're looking for different things. You're looking for different. You're taking a different aspect of focus, and of course, that's what we deal with very early in the book. And I don't know whether any of you also know me in the work I do with the late Ernest Rossi in mirroring hands and in Ericksonian hypnotherapy, but we talk about that there as well as one of the important aspects. It's one of the first chapters in my mirroring hands book. But we take, I took this little diagram. So we tried to make things in the book simple and easy to grasp, but that you could investigate and explore. And one of the most important aspects of understanding of thinking in the system is that the thing you see on the surface is the emergent property. See down the bottom, we've got this, I don't know whether my mouse shows up, but you can see emergence. So rather than properties, than the elements being a result of something, so we go back to the cause, fix the cause, and everything's better. So depression, anxiety, OCD, all of the various things, a cold, the flu, COVID, all these things have a complex of activities from which emerges an individual response, an outcome based on these elements. So the first thing that you understand in when you're thinking in complex systems are what are the fundamental principles, the things that don't change. And when we talk about fundamental principles in complexity, it's things like gravity and air and life and breath. And so we look at things that aren't variable, and there are some of those. And so sometimes we try and in linear thinking, we try and change the constants because we find those, of course, and that's not where we should be looking. But what we're looking is for the organizing rules, those organizing patterns, the frameworks, because although the whole point of linear thinking is that you can have more predictability, in complex thinking, you have less predictability. In fact, things are unpredictable. And so everyone goes, oh my God, this is terrible. We can't base, our science on that. But it's not true that it's unpredictable. What it is in complex systems, things move towards organized and predictable patterns within frameworks of these organizing rules. And it's extraordinary how simple it is. I don't know whether you've seen birds that are flying and flocking around the starlings doing the murmuration, as it's called, where it looks as though there's, who's leading this? Who's taking it somewhere? What's the cause of this framework? And it's absolutely fascinating. Based on the computer modeling, we haven't actually been able to ask a starling how it does it, but fly wingtip to wingtip, move in the same direction as the 7 birds around you, and when in doubt, move towards the middle. That's it. Those are the 3 main organizing principles that facilitate and result in the emergent property of that incredible ballet that seems to be taking on, being enacted in the sky. Now, there's different things we can talk about, and we're not going to, again, not in depth. There's chaos, where we talk about what's important there is that a very small input can have a very large output. And that is what is important. Effectively, the client has the greater amount of resources and the greater amount of extra therapeutic interactions and engagement in the environment. The therapist is really, some people argue, only about 30 to 40% of a effective therapy. Some argue as little as 13%, and we cover this in the book and the theory of that. But it doesn't matter if what you do is 1% of the input. It could have enormous impacts, and the focused attention that we bring, and the clarity of what we present, and the depth of and the excellence of what we present because of the research, tends to have enormously beneficial effects. Equally, you could do a fantastic therapy, and what the client actually responds to was the vase of flowers behind that had a bent flower, and they took their own metaphor. So, don't get too caught up in the fact that the client kind of doesn't need you. An interesting aspect, I won't talk now, but attractors, where we have single attractors, we have dual attractors, and we have complex chaotic attractors. And these are what pull a system in a way. So something like a single trauma becomes something that the system is always drawn back to. And we learn to understand that these fundamental principles with the organizing rules, the effects of chaos, the types of attractors, and the fact that the system itself will self-organize. It will seek to find some way to manage. And that's one of the organizing principles of the human experience. It will move towards a beneficial experience. That beneficial experience, unfortunately, may be gained by wearing a mask, by taking on a particular defensive type of activity. It could be by withdrawing. There are ways we can reach a better state, but that can even be improved more. And that's why it's very often hard to get past that's the resistance, and that's also the stuckness that clients have. But if you think in systems, you go, if I can just put a little wiggle in here or a little wiggle in there, this system will free itself. Wow. The client will free themselves. And that is what becomes easy to understand when you work in systems. And this one down here, last one I'll mention, feedback. You put something into an emergent property that's negative, that will feed back, and of course it will turn the system into a negatively devolving system. You bring out something that's positive, and that will feed back and stimulate and move the system towards beneficial change. There you go. Complexity theory in a nutshell. Matt, anything that I've missed or you want to add?
No, but understanding this is so comforting because we don't have to do it all. Actually, you'll be getting in the way if you try to do it all, because that person sitting in front of you is wanting to tend toward, an organized state of being that, like Richard said, you might just have a tweak over here or tweak over. It might take a little bit of experimentation, but you don't have to do it all. The system is wanting to, move towards an ordered state of being. So we've got stories, but I might leave some stories until question time if we have time, because I'm just conscious that we're coming up to
a few things more we want to go.
So let's skip through.
Let's jump over to and I'll throw this over to you, Matt, because there's a lot of stuff going on here. This is what, if you think in linear systems, you think, oh, that does that, I have to learn that. Oh my God, this and that. Whereas you think in complexity, you go,
yeah,
these are the elements that I'm to engage with.
Yeah, so I started out, looking at all of these different brain parts, this image on the right-hand side, and how they all interact, and it can be terribly complex if we break it down into, what we might imagine as these, divisible parts of the brain. But then we started to think more in terms of systems thinking and networking. And, we talk about networks in our book, but we really can't just stay in the cranium. Like I said earlier, we can't stay in the central nervous system. There is really just so much going on. And there's that an example of just some of the elements that are happening within and without the body when we just look at depression. And each of these elements, again, it might look like they're discrete elements that are sort of, separate, but that's kind of a bit of an abstraction. They're not really separate. There is a continuum through all of these elements, and they all have bidirectional influence upon one another. And this isn't even a complete picture, and it's it may very well be a wrong picture. We're learning all the time different things. Actually, I just sent something to Richard last night. I don't know if you got it, Richard, about
Yep,
the
yeah.
so we're now questioning, and actually there have been dissenters questioning the serotonin hypothesis of depression, this whole idea that there's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And so by taking SSRIs, antidepressants, that we can raise the level of serotonin in the brain, and that will resolve depression. And there's been an umbrella study done by the it was in England. I wrote it down here. A University College in London. And they said that their review suggests that a huge research effort based on the serotonin hypothesis has not produced convincing evidence of a biochemical basis to depression, which kind of flies in the face of everything that we've been learning for decades. This is consistent with research on many other biological markers. We suggest it's time to acknowledge that serotonin theory of depression is not empirically substantiated. So, as advocates of the science of psychotherapy, you have to look at this, and we have to reevaluate. Okay, so that one particular biomarker of serotonin, it may not play a big role. Actually, may not play much of a role at all. I mean, but there are so many other elements. I mean, there's things like vitamin D, vitamin B, and actually we'll talk about methylation a little bit later on. There is environmental things to consider, and of course interpersonal aspects to depression. There's just so many elements, and so what we want to be aware of all of these different elements and not get caught into any one particular school of thought. We want to remain open. That's probably enough to talk about.
It is, but here's a great example of the linear thinking as different from complex systems thinking, or thinking in the system, is that what they're saying is, as a causal nature, serotonin has not got the impact, and perhaps has a very small impact in the nature of depression. So actually trying to change serotonin in order to cause the depression to go away is not necessarily so robust. Cool.
Yeah.
In that closed, fixed area. But the essence of it is, when you think in systems, you go, so there's not a chemical imbalance when people are in depression. There is the perfect chemical balance for depression, because the brain will change in some ways when you're depressed. It will change in some ways when you're anxious. It will change in some ways when you're happy, when you're in love. And this we know, Candace Pert, the molecules of emotion. But it's not causal so much, although there may be, as Matt said earlier, there are causal elements within all complex systems. But you look at the fact that what if we look to change the serotonergic system, the serotonergic process? Now, of course, what we do is we throw in a pill because it's cause and effect. Now, we won't talk about it an enormous amount today because we're kind of doing it as we go. But curiosity, we talk about that in the latter parts of the book. That's one of my theoretical, propositions I'm working on, is that curiosity is probably one of the most ideal states for setting up a therapeutic and developing and growing mindset, mind state, or state of brain, biochemical milieu, all these different types of processes and ideas of studying. And what Matt's saying is, it's not that although we've got arrows where this goes to this, goes to this, goes to this in that diagram, is it's kind of, we've got double-sided arrows. This is happening here, and this is happening here, and all these things are happening together. Maybe there's an order to them in some respects, but they are the milieu of the body that occurs when you're having a certain outcome of, we'll just use depression in this case. And if you can change one of them, maybe you have a little work on what's going on in the hippocampus, or maybe you're able to access the gut biota, or maybe you've got some kind of work on the pro-inflammatory cytokines, and then the system will have some change. This is where the benefit of changing the serotonergic process is. It changes, and the system has different conditions, and it's able to then potentially self-organize into a better state. It's just a different way of thinking. It's just a different way of engaging. And so I've had someone say, so what, you just sort of try it and see what happens? And I go, in some respects, yes. It's better than predetermining a fixed process and saying, I'm going to do this until it happens. And if it doesn't happen, then it's the client's fault.
Yeah. And just to have some awareness so that you can intelligently refer, you know, so just on
that too,
staying on serotonin, SSRIs can have a negative impact on the gut microbiome, which actually produces, you know, the precursors to serotonin, and can actually amplify the effects of antibiotics. And so it can have a quite a severe knock-on negative effect. And if you're aware of that and you have a client and they've got something going on and they're on a course of antibiotics and they're on SSRIs, and you know they're having some very ill effects, and we can maybe talk a little bit later on about what some of those mental effects look like. If you understand that SSRIs and antibiotics can have a very negative effect on the gut microbiome and what that knock-on effect is in their mental health, then you can refer them on to maybe a naturopath, or you can just talk to them about, you know, what that could possibly, you know, what could possibly be going on, and refer them on to someone that could, you know, bring back a bit of a better balance in their system.
It's so interesting. And Matt and I, we did with the Science of Psychotherapy, we actually did a documentary. We've got in the Science of Psychotherapy Academy, which is really inexpensive to be in, but we've got a documentary on the microbiome and the microbiota using fabulous experts. We do a few of those. We've got autism. We've got one coming up on schizophrenia. So that's just stuff we're doing in there. And just quickly here, we don't have to spend a lot of time. We just bring your awareness. This is in the book and discussed really well. But it's this aspect of what stress does in the body and how we respond, how the body responds to these different disturbances and stimulants, a life event, an external thing, a physiological stress or something happening inside of us, social and environmental aspects, relationship issues, behavioral responses in yourself, things you're doing that cause problems or discomforts. All these things are coming in and prodding the system, pushing it outside of what we call the homeostasis, that safe and more balanced state of being. And when you're pushed out of homeostasis, you then have activity that is stimulated. Stress stimulates us to be active, to take some kind of action. Perhaps it's cognitively determined. We feel hungry, so we raise ourselves up and go to the fridge and get some food. Or it might be an internal stimulation. We get a bacteria or a virus, and our immune system begins to fire up, doing this all in its own self-organized way. But this activity is called allostasis. And it's just really handy to have common language. You know, we've all learned to say at least amygdala and limbic system and prefrontal cortex because of the years of these being repeated. And when we say them, there's now generally a common understanding of what those words mean. So that's another purpose of the book, to try and give understandings of and clarity to language so that we can speak together and know what we're talking about. And sometimes we give different references. We say, we're using this word, Arden uses it this way, Cosolino uses it that way, Siegel uses it this way, we're using it in this way. This knowledge and understanding. So major life events, all these things create stresses, and stress is good because it activates you to move you back to homeostasis. What is bad is unresolved stimulus, and that becomes distress. So when people say stress is good for you, yes, but excessive distress is distress, and that is damaging for you. So there's a piece of language that we've lost. Oh, I'm really stressed. Oh, I've been so stressed for so long. No, you're not so stressed for so long. You're distressed because it's become chronic.
Yeah. And this word allostasis, you know, it means balance through change, or balance was another word for balance, Richard. Stability through change.
Yeah.
And I think we can, typically this is used for our physiology, but I think we can use it. It might be a little bit metaphorical for you know, the way that we live. And one of the examples that I think about in my own life when it comes to this trying to gain stability through change is that I had a bit of a negative experience having an asthma attack as a kid in a camp in winter. And I have these triggers of smoke, cool air, and anything to do with camping. So I don't like camping. But there is an allostasis going on here for my own, within my own psychology and my own bodily response to those triggers of cool weather, the idea of going camping and smoke, that my whole system is wanting to you know, to preserve, you know, my balance, my stasis, by not going in that direction. So there is I guess a higher cortical response to the suggestion of going camping in winter. And that has many different levels, from some very core basic, as Richard said, limbic responses, to higher cortical excuses as to why that's not a good idea this winter. So
and so many interesting things we find out, Matt. They're talking about the co-resulting emotional and senses of safety and mental attitudes, but things like allergy, like, I don't know. I mean, I did a sort of another master's degree because I was interested in brain and mind, and we went in and looked at the immune system. And when the immune system gets out of whack and it just can't figure itself out, it's not a dramatic enough. It's not like a bacteria or a virus, and it just gets confused. That's part of the reasons why we have this allergic response, this histaminic response. And Matt's already mentioned briefly methyl groups. Methyl groups, which hopefully we get to, we'll have to scoot along. But methyl groups are a particular molecular compound that we produce through what we eat and what we do. And they're vital in balancing and rebalancing and restabilizing the histaminic approach. So just understanding that you've got someone with allergies and they've got these emotional pressures that are going on, goodness gracious me, it just might be the type of B12 they're taking that will help, that will shift the process. Now, once I've got to that idea with them, then I'm going to send them off to someone who's got a specialist knowledge in that material. But yeah, I've twigged, well, just a minute, and we'll move on there. But let's move on. That's just an example of the way. And right through the book, we have these sort of clinical notes. We make sure that we keep coming back to, you know, what's happening in the therapy room.
Now, I think I'm pretty sure that you would all be fairly familiar with the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and the way that is broken down. I'm conscious of time, Richard, so maybe we can skip ahead. We'll jump going. I think you're right, Matt, because we've got that, because what we're keen about is this brains in the body stuff we were talking about, isn't it? That's right. So there are many brains in the body, but we don't think of the other brains typically as we think about the central nervous system. So, Richard, if we want to just skip to the heart brain.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, and a brain is defined as an aspect of biology that autonomously, so independently, does things that make decisions or make changes in areas of the body other than itself.
Yep.
So that's the importance, because of course every organ and every part of our system is talking to itself, but these talk outside themselves. So we've looked at this. Oh, look, there's a heart, and we have diagrams. We've drawn you things like this in the book so you can get a look at stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So so the heart has an amazing capacity to influence the central nervous system. There is more afferent, so nerve impulses going toward the brain than there are from the brain to the heart. And this is it obviously doesn't think like our head brain, but there is certainly, and there's a lot of, metaphorical language about, heart attitude and how the heart feels and thinks, that has an influence on our body. What do we want to bring out here, Richard? Because I am
no, that's cool. That's great. That's the heart, and we do this. We anthropomorphize the term thinking to these elements of our body. It's not thinking as in cognitive determination. It thinks, though. It has responses, and we've just got that heartbeat on the side there. Here we are, called the RR intervals. Oh, gee whiz, don't be too technical with me. I know. We've heard of heart rate variability. We hear that in polyvagal theory. We hear that in heart math. Now, heart rate variability. So that's great. I've used this term. I think, oh, yes, it's really good if you've got good heart rate variability. And then you say to people, so what is that? And they go, oh, well, that's when there's variability in the heart. It's just, you just need to know quickly about it. It's real simple. The heart beats. This point up the top here is called an R. And the RR interval. What we want to be to show that the heart is healthy is you want to have some variations. So in here, 826 milliseconds, 844, and then a little bit different. This is a good sign. The more regulated the heartbeats are between the RR interval, the more the heart is saying, whoop, something's not right. And of course, when the heart says something's not right, it then begins to change the way it functions. And I don't know whether RSA, whether you've heard that in polyvagal theory, the Porges stuff, if you've read some of those, that's respiratory sinoatrial arrhythmia. Oh, that was well remembered. And it's to do with this little guy here. All this stuff, this sinoatrial node. Here's the sort of the regulator of what is the rhythm and the beat and these heart rates. And guess who pops down and has a nice big chat with all these elements in the heart? The vagus nerve. So that's why the vagus nerve is really important, not only for polyvagal theory, but for other aspects. And again, we have a full chapter on the vagus nerve, which includes polyvagal theory, but there's a lot more. And also some of the arguments about polyvagal theory, some of the elements where people think that Stephen has missed the point, and there's some arguments that he's got some things wrong. Well, that's good. That's good that we have these discussions.
And just quickly, and I know we're throwing a lot of information at you very quickly, but with this heart rate variability, what we're really looking at about is flexibility in the autonomic nervous systems, the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system. You can imagine like a seesaw, and with good heart rate variability, where the heart is responding very quickly to changes in the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the nervous system, that's healthy. We want a heart that reacts very quickly to internal and external stressors, and to be able to do that in a very flexible manner is healthy. And high heart rate variability is an indicator that is happening. The other thing that I wanted to point out too is in our language, we talk about what is your heart telling you. That is a very literal thing that is going on. The afferent nervous impulses, through the vagus complex is actually informing your head brain about something. And we're going to get onto the gut and what's your gut telling you. Well, actually, it's giving you a lot of information
from the gut. So we'll jump to that next, but just a quick one, Matt. So I know we're just moving along. One of the influences of this heart rate variability is your breath. So when you breathe in, the heart speeds up a bit because it's got some extra oxygen, and when it breathes out, the heart relaxes a little bit. So this is this idea of, there's many aspects, but this is one. So what is one of the ways in which you can rebalance and get back this heart rate variability is through breath. So suddenly we go, oh, well, I've loved doing breath. It's been fantastic. Breathing exercises, yoga have been doing it forever. Yes, breath is terribly important. And suddenly we get just not, now we've got the facts, now it's right. It's now I know more, and I am more comfortable, and I am more confident to be able to work with breath. And I have more depth of imagination. When someone's breathing, not only do I see the lungs opening, but oh, I see the heart going up and down in its variable rate. And that kind of right-brained, imaginative visualization of the body functioning is one of the things that I get out of the science. I certainly get the technical aspects of things, but I get a more beautiful experience, co-engaged experience with the client and myself. So that's one of the.
Let me throw another one in. As you're talking about imagination, so there's another technique of mindful compassion that you concentrate on a heartfelt sense of compassion, whether it's self-compassion or other, compassion for others. And as you sink down into a really heartfelt sense, you are actually stimulating the neural architecture around your heart into a more flexible mode. And that is a practice that can actually change this heart brain and become a lot healthier.
And it gives us a sense of the why for and the how to and the where we go. So let's just go quickly here now into this gut-brain axis. Lots of words there. You can go back and have a check of this when you re-look at this. But this gut microbiota, there's actually more DNA in our gut microbiota than in us. There's more variability. There's lots of things. We have this co-integrated system of symbiotic existence. And we can screw up our gut biota. And when that gut biota is in a mess, it says something bad's going on, and so sends out messages. The areas outside of the skull brain are a lot more sledgehammer, a lot more hammer to kill a fly, because they're more interested in our survival as the basis of their functioning. But there's lots of these interesting ways of trying to understand it. And again, these are some of the images from the book to try and help make it easier to understand. Matt.
Yeah. So, and this is a huge nascent field, which has huge potential for treating all sorts of things, and mental health being at the top of the list. So our gut microbiome, having a healthy gut bacteria. There's a lot of research going on. And actually, we do have another documentary on this. So just very quickly, I'm going to race through this. So on the left-hand side, you can see there the intrinsic primary afferent neurons, the IPAN. That's the gut brain. They're the neurons which are talking to each other from your mouth to your anus, and that they help with everything to do with digestion and a whole lot more when it comes to regulating what is going on within and without the gut. And of course, and then we have the extrinsic primary afferent neurons that's communicating to your central nervous system and to these intrinsic neurons as well. So you've got this very complex system going on there, and we refer to this as the second brain. It is the neural architecture is obviously very different to the central nervous system, but it is a brain, as Richard described earlier.
Yeah. And it uses the same organizing principles and organizing rules and that systemic process. Nature doesn't have one thing for the brain, one thing for the gut, one thing for the heart. It uses the same concepts and principles all over the place in different ways, relating specifically to the environment, which is exactly what is the outcome of an emergent, the emergent property of a complex system. The head brain is going to become a different architecture to the heart brain and to the gut brain, because there are different environments, different elements within the system from which these structures emerge. And you start to see, this is what I'm saying, you start to see the beauty in it. But we'll just skip quickly now to this other one, which I found the most interesting and people are just starting to talk about, and that's the skin brain. That the skin itself, our largest organ in our whole body, the skin itself will activate, guess what? It activates the system of cortisol. It activates the stress response, and it activates the stress response with the same chemicals, with the same molecular systems as the brain does. It uses this pro-opiomelanocortin stuff that then stimulates this adrenocorticotrophin hormone, which then goes to the adrenal cortex and stimulates cortisol into the body. So it's a two-way street. So you've got someone gets a sunburn, someone has a blunt trauma. This in itself, without the brain coming into the game at all, can stimulate stress and anxiety, can stimulate a trauma response. And equally, that's in a afferent way, but in an efferent way, the skin is often the place where you can begin to see that there are problems going on in the system, because if there's a lot of cortisol, there's a lot of distress, there's other elements that are going on, you'll have this expressing itself on the skin, rashes, eczema, these various different elements of the skin. So when you're treating someone, look at their skin. Is it dry? Is it moist? Is it flushed? Is it colorless? There's so much that the skin can tell you about the state of stability, the state of instability, and the state of distress. Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've talked a little bit about vagal nerves. We might, Richard, if you don't mind, we might skip ahead.
Yeah, I think that's going, and people can ask questions if they want some extra. But we've addressed a lot of the elements. I agree with you. Yeah, but remembering that the polyvagal theory is a beautiful and wonderful effort by Steve Porges to look at what exists and try and give it not only explanation, but try and give us some cognitive, conscious understanding of what we can do to positively impact it. Remembering that our system is doing it automatically anyway. Someone gets upset and worried, they're going to start breathing. They're going to start breathing more heavily. Now, the trouble is there are other systems going on, so they will overbreathe. So, of course, we hyperventilate, we do all kinds of problems. But we are a social species. We are not supposed to respond just to ourselves. So someone starts getting anxious, they start breathing really panic, and the whole purpose of that is so that the person near to them goes, oh my gosh, they're going into this unhealthy panting of breathing. I need to help them regulate their breathing. And this has been happening for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. We are now just simply understanding it and being able to share it cognitively. What a wonderful gift that we have.
Yeah.
So let's go on. I think here we can pop on this one too, just like we've been saying. Cognitive impairment, there's a million things. There's traumatic injury, there's Alzheimer's disease, there's dementia. We'll talk about that because I really want people to hear an important story from you, Matt, about the way the body can affect the brain, and how when you only think brain, you actually can be, well, actually you could cause a lot of problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, on this point, so I have a personal story. So autoimmune encephalitis is, as the name suggests, it's inflammation of the brain. And there has been I'll sort of cut this short because I realize we've only got a minute left.
It's okay. A few
But
minutes.
there is a diagnosis called PANDAS, and as it says there, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections, and that's a mouthful. But what it means is that the immune system has incorrectly identified parts of the brain as strep, or there could be any number of other things too. It's called mimicry, where the immune system incorrectly identifies part of the body. This is typical autoimmunity, and it can create psychiatric looking symptoms. Well, they are psychiatric symptoms. They can be like psychotic, OCD, all sorts of things, which if you're just looking at the symptoms, you would think, okay, we're probably looking at schizophrenia here, or some sort of schizoidal complication, or OCD, when in fact you're actually dealing with an autoimmune disorder. And maybe in the question time, we can flesh this out a little bit more. But what I learned through this personal experience with an autoimmune disorder, which was basically a basal ganglion inflammation, was that the traditional approach to deal with those symptoms, pharmacology for schizoidal type of behavior does not work. Actually, it exacerbates and makes things worse. And we need a completely different approach.
Well, I think Matt, just summarizing it quickly for you, because I know it's always difficult to tell this story. It was in your family, and you had your son going through these terrible behaviors, taking all kinds of antipsychotic drugs and sedatives, and people just didn't know. They just didn't know that the brain could be infected by an infection in the body, a strep infection in the body. Now, finally, you found someone who knew it. I mean, years ago, it would never have been discovered, and your poor son would have probably ended up in an asylum. And the literally was given antibiotics. And again, we talk about in the book how this is not exactly appropriate for every single person. So there's differences in different systems. But literally, it was overnight, wasn't it, Matt?
Absolutely.
That he became able to self-manage himself. Yeah.
That's right. We eventually found a neurologist that was on the ball and knew what was going on here. He prescribed a very simple antibiotic, erythromycin, which wasn't to kill strep in the system. It was to modulate the immune system, specifically Th17, killer T cell in the immune system. And overnight, literally, we went from these psychiatric kind of manifestations to a normal kid. And it was miraculous. But it wasn't any surprise to the neurologist, who knew exactly what was going on. Now, these people will present to psychologists and to psychiatrists, and it's understandable, that they look like very typical symptoms of what we know maybe as schizophrenia or OCD, like I said. But it takes a little bit more research and understanding to find out exactly the causal nature, because they can be vastly different from those typical psychiatric disorders. And
of course, the message was, when given an antipsychotic, it didn't do any good. So that was when the experts should have gone, oh, we've got to look for something else. But no, they doubled down. This is the trouble. This is the trouble with our linear thinking. Now, we've run out of, we've come to our hour, so we do have discussion time. We can enjoy that, because we're going to have a little bit of a talk about genetics, but it's a hell of a thing. And it's one of the other underlying elements of this self-organizing system. We know with our DNA and RNA how they function. Epigenetics is the overlay that occurs on us during our lifetime in relation to experience that prepares us for our life expectations, our biophysical expectations, which sometimes tie in and correlate with our mental expectations, but sometimes they're entirely different, and they create our mental expectations. Epigenetics can actually be heritable as well. So I'm dealing with someone now who's a fourth generation after the Holocaust, still having traumatic impacts because of epigenetic changes that have remained in their body. Fascinating things when you look at twins and different people, how similar they are, but then how different they are based on their environment. Well, look at those guys. Our memory is an epigenetic process. It turns on and turns off. This is one of the things with genes. They turn on, they turn off for various reasons. And of course, we have a whole chapter of this going on in the book. And this methylation process is something we explain, and we explain how it can be improved with diet, how it can be improved with some variations in the whole foods diet, and also the nature of the folate that you're taking and the various types of mutations and problems that can occur in the genetic natures of and expressions within this methylation system. All this stuff, you know, you read it the first time and you go, you read it the second time and you go, you read the clinic notes and to find out how it relates to the therapy room, and you go, and that is the way we expect our book to be appreciated and read. And we're now more or less back at where we were at the beginning, with a whole bunch of things rolling around our head. But be fascinated by those things that interested you, by those things that overwhelmed you, by those things that disinterested you. They are the things that a book like ours is all about, to fill in the gaps, but also to stimulate you to your own self fascinations, your own self wonders, and those things that you are inclined to be engaged in. So, Matt, I think whirlwind episode of Brainstorm.
That was a whirlwind. Yep.